On the sixth day, I followed the crest of a mountain beside yet another valley. This one held a visible length of silvery, weaving water. By mid-morning, I felt something maddening on the edge of my senses, like the high whine of those tiny, blood-sucking insects that caused itchy welts. This noise went deeper than skin, however, trilling at the base of my skull. "Follow the ley lines," the queen said, "and find the magic users." Had I found the ley line? Although creating new pathways to magic was not my talent, I was still an elf. I could use a mage's inventions and understand how it felt when I did. If this feeling was right, it may lead me straight to the tower. This was easier to assume than execute, as it turned out. I kept my direction better with landmarks than trying to follow that subtle buzzing pitch, but I didn't give up listening as I noted the changes in the landscape. There were fewer pine trees, with newly budding plants taking their place. I was going down in elevation. The air I breathed did not seem as thin. The underbrush was thicker amongst thin saplings, full of noisy obstacles and bright light, which led to daily headaches for a deep earth creature like me. I preferred moving among the tallest trees whose wide branches covered the forest floor with deep shadow. The shade was a relief to my eyes while I crisscrossed over the ley line by feel. My nose warned me of the next change. I paused downwind from an unusual richness of flowers and herbage. So far, these had not shown to grow together in the wild, and there were new fragrances I didn't yet know. A chill spread over my back. Cultivation. There was no obvious tower jutting out of a mountainside, so I assumed the farmer wasn't also the death mage I sought. Do I avoid this place entirely or observe it for a time? What benefit might there be to approach? I checked my water skin, pursing my lips. The obvious answer was drinking water. If there was a tended garden, there would be a well, a pond, or access to a stream or river. Would it be worth it? That depended on who lived here and how many. I stalked forward, crouching in mottled shade where even the birds forgot I was there. Grasses grew thick here in green, yellow, orange, and red. I saw colors amongst the flowers, too, and a discernible pattern to the placement of the bushes. The design wasn't rigid like the web gardens of the Queen's Palace, and there were no curated walking paths, but there was a visual appeal and balance that didn't appear to the natural state I'd been studying for weeks. The garden also had a well. I saw the raw, flat stones laid in a rough, circular form atop each other amongst the grass, defining its boundaries so one would not fall in. I saw a bucket and rope, too. This was the most dangerous source of water I'd found. But the next one was that silver winding river half a day's journey away in the wrong direction from the ley line. Right here, I believed that I stood directly on it. The annoying treble in my head was constant. What were the chances that a non-magical sentient would build a well in the middle of a forest? Might have to find out. I stepped over a woody vine twining up a massive tree, and it moved. The thing crackled like an alarm as it wrapped and twisted tight around my ankle in a snare trap. Shit! Even as the vine whipped back and yanked me off my feet, I drew and held tight to one fighting dagger. Suspended upside down, I curled up and struck at an angle just above my foot, severing the vine in one hit, only to drop with a groan onto several knobby tree roots. I rolled onto my side and loosened my Spider Guardian's pouch before I did anything else. They scrambled out and took position beneath my hair, while I replaced my hood over my head. After crawling to center myself away from the vines, I watched the damaged one shrink back against the tree. I did not doubt that someone knew I was here. Flee or fight? Before I could decide, a body came into my periphery, and I dodged behind a tree. This one had a bow.
"Who is there?"
cried a female voice in the trade language, projecting well for the distance.
"Show yourself."
My elder was right about the accents changing. I almost didn't understand her. What now? An arrow might be trained on me should I try to bolt. I waited for others to back her up, men especially, but heard no other feet running, saw no shadows slinking to flank me. Her voice shook when she called again.
Show yourself!
I frowned, glancing at the vines. Knowing what to look for, I saw how many there were. Traps all over. Just one mage? Is it possible she is alone? If this was true, we might bargain. I was not burning for a fight. I drew a breath to speak. I seek only water. Quiet. I wasn't sure if she heard me. I was not used to shouting in open space. Then she drew a breath.
Only?
Yes, only. Will you bargain? She hesitated.
Not without a face or a name. Stand in the light.
Not with that bow ready and aimed. Squinting against the brightness, I peeked around the tree. The blur was bad at this distance, but she stood in plain view, and I saw what I expected to see. A very pale face and a slender feminine form taller than me. She wore daytime forest colors, which blended in, and I believed that she knew how to use that bow. I reminded myself that the golden hair did not mean she was old like my kind, but instead that she was young. I heard tension relax on her bow. The arrow tip was down, but she said nothing. What was she doing? From lifelong habit, I looked up, checking the tree limbs above me. It was good and bad that I did. A bird of prey was watching me with eerie intensity in its yellow gaze. A falcon. Our eyes met, and I could have sworn it glared at me. The bird emitted a piercing screech and launched out of the trees and into the garden, flying straight for the blonde figure. What in the abyss?
Leave now, Dark One!
She cried, anger and fear making her voice hoarse as she lifted her longbow again.
No bargain! I will pierce your eye if you approach this hut.
Dark One? She thinks I'm a demon? The more immediate concern was how she had known. Did the bird tell her somehow? Was she a mage that speaks with animals? I hadn't heard of such a thing.
I've no choice.
The tall blonde whispered, far less confident.
You'll not go away, will you? You've returned to punish me again.
What? A crack sounded above me, and I looked to see another vine unbending from the trunk. It had thorns. Another undulated closer to the ground, coming to life like a snake as it lashed out in my direction, though fortunately falling short. She talks with animals and plants? I shifted around my tree, moving to another, trying to avoid them both without exposing my back. A third vine trembled in front, and I saw I would soon be surrounded by ropes of long, wicked thorns. She was forcing me out of hiding and doing a good job of it. No choice, indeed. Any smart fighter would try to incapacitate the mage before she fought their effects. Vines darted for me, one snagging and tearing my cloak as I dropped my heavy pack and pulled out 2 web pellets in one hand, gripping a long dagger in the other. I closed my eyes against the sun, felt the tiny brush of my spider guardian's legs as they settled further out of view, and sprinted out of the trees. I kept low and to the side where the falcon was perched. But then an arrow struck the tree near my head and I gasped. Sucking web! Swallowing further curses, I tore the ground, sprinting in an erratic pattern. Unlike in my home tunnels, I had plenty of space to move. As a flutter of wings came over my head again, I pitched the first web pellet just above where I judged the falcon to be. The bird flew into it, bursting and splattering the magical webbing inside across its feathers. Angry shrieks pained my ears as it crashed into the ground nearby, though the piteous squawking which followed proved it hadn't broken its neck.
Pila! No!
Another arrow sank into the dirt near my feet, and I forgot to breathe. I kept running. She dropped the bow as I closed in, drawing something else from her waist. I didn't think before disarming her, my blind fighting sending whatever it was spinning into the tall grass. I swept her legs out from under her. She screamed from the ground as I pitched my second web pellet to immobilize her as well.
No!
"Stay down!" I barked. I heard snaps and cracks, and then something flung earth into my face. Fuck! The roots in the ground thrust up, winding together to answer her desperate call. Something wrapped tight around my thigh. It had a set of spikes which punctured my leathers, and then me. It burned. Another 4 torture ropes wrapped around each arm, around my waist and my neck, pulling me to the ground as the spikes tore into my skin where armor didn't protect me. I hooked 2 fingers between one vine and my throat, freezing in terror as the spikes pressed into my gut against the black leather. I hadn't screamed that I was aware. I forced myself to breathe. My binds constricted, cutting off blood to my limbs, pushing the spikes deeper, and trying to choke me all at the same time. "Stop!" I wheezed. My guardian spiders answered, jumping out to skitter down the vines to the ground. My eyes were still shut, but I heard the golden-haired mage yelp in pure surprise. All 3 had bitten her. "You have no time," I growled in our common tongue as one of the thorns pressed into the hollow of my throat. My hand trembled, fighting against it. "Release me! I can give you the cure!"
You lie!
No time! You die! Bird die! Free me! A single moment passed before the constriction stopped. Then the thorns were yanked out by the vines, unwinding from my body and withdrawing into the soil. I couldn't know if this happened because she wanted to live or because she could no longer concentrate on her spell, but I heard her choking, struggling to breathe as she thrashed from seizure in the grass. Blind still, I scrambled clumsily to her web-covered body, sightlessly cutting the sticky ropes from her torso before dropping my dagger and exchanging it for a small cylinder at my belt. The closed tip was clear, the vial behind it filled with the antivenom for the spider's bite. With a quick, sharp twist, I shed the casing from the pre-scored end, exposing the finest glass needlepoint that any crafter could manage. I needed the largest muscle possible in which to inject it, so I flipped the mage over, blindly hooking frayed webbing in one hand, and put a knee on her back to hold her down. Her loose trousers had enough give for me to pull them down and expose her skin. My gloved hand confirmed one buttock was naked, and my other pressed the needle to her soft skin. Quickly. I jammed the glass point into the muscle at the top of her ass, and her whole body jolted with pain. I snapped off the tip inside to release the potent serum deep into her flesh before withdrawing it. The needle was still in there, but the vial was empty. I pulled her pants up and rolled her over again so her lungs wouldn't struggle to work against the ground. The blonde archer continued to breathe, but it was labored, and her body was taken with small, shivering tremors. Meanwhile, my spiders lethargically returned to me, retreating into their open pouch on my belt. Their calmness suggested she and her vines were no threat anymore. Preparing myself, I opened my eyes and stood on my feet, blinking a lot before I could see anything. The exposed meadow was all a blur. My opponent's eyes were open and animal-like in their fear, moving everywhere, unable to focus on me. The whites were bloodshot from the effects of the venom, but her irises were vibrant green, the same color as leaves on the trees. I saw the 3 sets of fang bites low on her neck, around her collar, streaked with red. All the rest of her pale skin was covered by doe skin. Then I saw her ears. They weren't rounded, but long and pointed like mine. She wasn't human like I thought. The squalling falcon fighting on the ground drew my attention as its mistress fought for breath. With every stubborn attempt to flap its wings, Pila strained and stretched the webbing, though I didn't believe she would break free anytime soon. Looking back at the pale-skinned elf, I saw that she had finally set her gaze upon me. Tears dripped from her eyes, across her temple, and into her hair as she watched me, watching her. Then I realized I was bleeding. The thorns had given me deep puncture wounds. I counted 12, which hurt, and wet my black leathers to a concerning level. Shit. I reached for a little brown pellet in a different pouch and placed it beneath my tongue. It tasted like a mud ball, but I allowed the bitter thing to slowly dissolve while I retrieved my dagger from the ground. Not a week into this mission, and I'd already used one anti-venom and had dire need to prevent festering. You're doing great, Serana. I eyed the flopping, floundering falcon. Did the creature ever get tired or shut its beak? Worse, the clouds were thinning. The day grew even brighter, and I was lightheaded and aching. We go to your dwelling, I said. Out of sun. The blonde elf shook her head. A good sign, I thought, though she trembled violently as she tried and failed to sit up. She was far too weak.
No, no. Just kill me. If you intend to torture me again.
Wait a minute. Again? I shifted my weight as the bleeding holes in my limbs throbbed and the falcon screeched. I must clean my wounds, I said, ignoring both the plea and the accusation.
You deserve worse. You're evil.
I arched a brow. Evil? I'd heard this word while learning the surface tongue, but still did not understand it. Doing harm counted for much of it, but then this made every warrior evil. What was the point of having a word besides fighter? If one added greed or some other excess, maybe I could count the queen's priestesses as evil. Or perhaps the excess of violent sex made my sisterhood evil to one such as this. The word seemed to have no use that enemy or competitor did not cover as well. I asked bargain, I said. For water.
You lie,
she repeated. You said this. I did not lie. I stopped the poison. You and your bird live.
Pleasure.
I didn't respond, for that was true enough. I could just take the water and leave her here, though at a heavy price to my own body and strength. The endlessly struggling falcon inside its webs finally drew my focus. Pila worked one wing diligently, wearing the strands faster, so I stepped over it to pick up the base of its feather tail for a distraction. The bird really hated that. I stretched out my arm to keep the furiously swinging bird ball away, grateful for the talons, beak, and one wing that were stuck together. Quite the determined guardian.
Oh, God, please, don't hurt her,
the elf whined, managing to roll herself over. I let the blonde sweat a moment, then said, We rest in your dwelling. Clean wounds and quiet. No fight.
Yes, don't hurt my baby.
I set the sticky, protesting bundle of feathers down beside her, where the falcon finally calmed a little. Exhausted, the pale elf's forehead dropped to the grass. Stay here, I said. I get my pack, then I help you walk. You show me safe place and safe water. Pila swatted at me with that one freed wing, the falcon's tawny eyes staring. This one would never give up. I felt the urge to smile, and so I did, winking at the forest elf's noisy guard before I went to retrieve my pack behind the tree. I could hear my leader in my head asking me what in the shits I was doing. I can't continue to the tower like this. I must tend the wounds first. And I need not kill her. The wiser voice had an easy counter. Ah, but suppose someone else might be at her dwelling, novice. And she's not saying. She is hoping for help when you get there. Sour milk farts. I avoided the obvious vine traps and returned to my prisoner with my possessions. Although I was shorter and weighed down, I still held the falcon by her tail and helped the blonde archer to her feet, gripping her by the upper arm. I looked around. All this time and noise, all that shouting, and no one had come to help her. "Get water here?" I suggested, tossing my chin toward the rustic well, although I already had plenty to carry.
Some at my dwelling.
"You lie." The pale-skinned one dared to look insulted.
No.
"We'll see."
You've been listening to an excerpt from Surfacing, Book 4 of The Sister Seekers. If you enjoyed it, you can find more from this series at the author's website, etaski.com, spelled ETASKI.com.